afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Strategies for Improving Collaboration. My name's Amy Smith-Fisher. I'm the training administrator for Los Angeles Superior Court. And I got one of the easiest gigs because I don't have to do much of an introduction. So we had an excellent introduction to our speaker during our lunch session. A couple of things I do want to remind you of is if you do have a cell phone, to turn it on silent or vibrate. Also, please make sure you go onto the app and rate our speaker, both from the lunch session and the... Pass your cell phones up and so forth. So we heard on yesterday how it's hard to remember names. So this is really good because all we have to remember is, oh yeah, the Navy SEAL guy who gave us a book. And then you get the book out and you say, oh yeah, it's Brent Gleason. So I'd like to turn things over to Brent Gleason. This will be interactive. So as you have questions and so forth, I'll come on around with the mic so that everyone has an opportunity to hear you. We are also taping this as well. And so it really is important that you wait for the microphone so that we can hear both sides of the conversation in video land. So thank you all.
And I'll also repeat the question to some regard when it comes out. So, whoa. Yeah. Okay. Thank you guys for joining this session. This is a lot more informal, but I also want it to be a lot more collaborative and get you guys outside your comfort zone a little bit, right? We talked about that. Sharing your experiences as far as the topic being collaboration and strategies for collaboration in your teams or your organizations. And I've got some examples and sort of case study type of stories from my own experiences in my companies and some recommendations, but really wanted to mostly for this period hear from you guys about what you've seen works in your organizations from a collaboration standpoint, so everybody is learning from everybody else, because this whole damn thing is about collaboration. So we should probably collaborate on the key learnings and takeaways that we want to get out of the session, right? Right? All right. I'm this close to starting a burpee session. This close. We got a full hour to fill, so we got plenty of time. I use burpees because burpees are the most popular punishment in SEAL training. One of my instructors in second phase assigned me 1,000 burpees one afternoon. We had been on, I never finished them. Still working on them. This was a long time ago. Quick story about that. We were in second phase, you do combat diving. So we'd been doing an afternoon dive and heading back to the base to prepare for the nighttime dive. And there was a dock and there was some, we have our SWCC, or Special Warfare Combat Crewmen, or they used to call them the special boat teams. Our joke is that those boats aren't special until we get on them. But we joke that because a lot of the guys who wash out of BUDS end up in the special boat teams. But I'm kidding, of course. But the instructor was like, Brent, run down that dock and do a cannonball and get those guys wet. And apparently he was joking. But I was like, roger that. And I just ran down the dock and did a cannonball and got their team leader wet, which he was not happy about. And so then, of course, I get in trouble. I'm in, full wetsuit, full gear, 2 heavy 2080 dive tanks on my back, so he makes me stay in push-up position in the aisle of the bus all the way back to the base. And then when we got back and cleaned our gear, he's like, Gleason, give me 1,000 burpees, bust them out. And I started crying, of course. And once I wiped the tears away and started quivering, I started doing very poorly executed, very slow burpees as long as he wasn't looking. And then eventually everybody left. It was a Friday afternoon. Most of the instructors left. He left. I was still doing burpees. This was like 2 hours later. And then some guy walks out, he's like, Gleason, what the hell are you still doing here? Get out of here. I'm like, I'm doing the burpees. And he's like, get out of here. So luckily, I didn't have to finish those, but burpees are a very popular punishment in SEAL training. So I wanted to kind of kick this off. It's a little bit more of an intimate setting than a big ballroom like that, and see if you guys had any other questions, whether it's about my experience as a SEAL, but more so kind of start leaning into the conversations around leadership and management in today's organizations, collaboration, prioritization of team and employee engagement, and the successes and or obstacles you guys have had with that. But just wanted to first open it up with just some general Q&A as a follow-on to what we just did. So, yes, sir, we staged that. We pre-planned that one. I can just repeat it, it's fine. Okay.
We were talking earlier that you did the presentation largely from memory, and so we were just wondering, did you get any special mental training on like focus and concentration?
You do, yes, and a lot of that focus is during sniper school, during sniper training, and during reconnaissance training. They'll have, for example, one of the things you start off with, they might have just a table with 57 different items on the table, and they give you 20 seconds to look at that table and then write down as many of those objects as you see and describe them in as much detail as you can in 20 seconds. I usually got about 2. And then in the same thing in sniper school, you might be, or in reconnaissance training, you'll be in a hide site looking at another hillside, looking for specific objects that they've hidden on the hillside and then relaying that information back, but also doing it from memory and things like that, because obviously things are moving at the speed of war when you're in a combat situation and you have to remember key things in very dynamic situations. So they do spend a lot of time on memorization and getting good at that. But also, SEAL training is in large part very academic. It's like getting a PhD in special warfare. So you spend just as much time, if not more, in the classroom. I was opening up some cabinets, trying to clean out the garage at, of course, the demands of my wife. It's funny how our priorities change over time. I have no priorities now. My priorities are my wife's priorities. So I was cleaning out the garage and found notebooks literally this thick just on demolition, notebooks this thick just on land warfare, on urban combat, on ship attacks, on combat diving physics, things like that. So it is largely academic and not just in memorization, but you spend so much time in the classroom and you have to make 90% of above on every single test for officers, and then it's 80 above on every test for the enlisted guys. So, and these days, because we've intentionally sort of lifted the veil on the secrecy of the SEAL community on purpose so that we can do a better job of recruiting and retaining talent, we've got these brave young men lining up out the doors, but 2/3 of the enlisted guys have at least a college degree, sometimes a master's degree. The officers, in large part, are largely, they're Ivy League level athletes and things like that. Some have masters or doctorates in some, but so it's very academically rigorous, and intentionally so, because you have to learn. And actually, it's not just like college or grad school for most of us, where we retain about 5% of what we learn. We actually have to learn this stuff because it's very applicable on the battlefield. But good question. Thank you. Next question. Yes, sir. You can just ask and I'll repeat it.
Okay. So when you're stepping into a new team, what are the critical steps to creating a culture and trust?
Sure.
Besides reading your book.
Yeah, yeah, of course. From a SEAL perspective or a civilian organizational perspective? Well, one of the things, let's think about it from a leadership and management standpoint. One of the things that's critically important when you're building a culture, defining that culture, and managing and protecting that culture, which is what we do a very good job in the SEAL teams. I'll explain that briefly as an anecdote. It's a core priority of leadership and management to ensure that you're aligning every decision and every person you bring on board into that organization. They must align with culture. And we talk a lot about culture fit these days, but that does not mean a lack of diversity by any means. Most high-performance organizations and strong cultures have a very high level of diversity on the team, but what they do have is shared values, shared vision, shared sense of purpose, people who really emotionally connect to the mission narrative of that organization, whatever that organization is. And that's more important today now more than ever, because like I said before, according to a lot of research, that's what today's younger generations really care about, is the work environment, the values, the vision, and most importantly, that purpose and that culture that they can be a part of, in large part. Like the millennials, for example. Don't get me started on the millennial set. My last company, we had about 200 employees. I'd say about 75% were millennials. And I, engaged them in a lot of employee engagement activities. Some are engaged, some are disengaged. Those 67% of, and I'm getting back to culture in a minute, but this is very applicable. The engagement of the team has a direct correlation to the culture and culture management, because if you have a highly disengaged workforce, clearly it's not a leadership and managerial priority to make sure that there's shared purpose, shared values, and a strong culture, because that really drives engagement to much higher levels. Now, of course, in my last company, we had problems like that, but of course, I also, as a leader and manager, had to learn how to lead a multi-generational workforce. And let me tell you guys something, you cannot lead a team of millennials like you do a SEAL platoon. I don't know what it is, but they don't like getting screamed at in public. They do not respond well to waterboarding, so take that off the list. They don't like it. They'll go straight to HR. And then they'll sue you. I talked about all the mistakes that I've made as a leader in my transition from Navy SEAL leadership to civilian leadership. Not all are applicable. But again, going back to your point is one of the, a lot of my wisdom on this stuff is from the mistakes I've made in, like I said before, racing to my death as a business leader. Like in our first company and even in the second company, you raise a bunch of money, you build a team, and then you're racing off for sales and profitability and growth or whatever the organization is trying to achieve. But oftentimes we skip those foundational steps. We skip the elements of really defining and building a strong culture and putting it on paper so that we can refer to it, defining those core values, and first starting with not just what we think sounds good, like integrity, but actual core values that the founders and leaders and managers can really connect with. And most organizations, and I've worked with some in the past couple weeks that are just now, companies that have been around for 20 years, they're just now getting around to defining their culture and their core values. It's better late than never, of course, but you can imagine even companies can grow to a global level without focusing on these things. But it causes a ton of internal issues, high employee turnover, a lot of confusion, a lack of productivity, and of course employee engagement when those things aren't fundamentally there, if not later on, but in a perfect world from the beginning. So in my first company, we raised $2 million in a Series A round. We were doubling in size every year, all good problems to have, but didn't do any of that stuff. No values, no culture. It was sales, 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 sales. Growth, 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 shareholder value. And then I was like, you know what, we need to kind of slow down here and really define before we grow, because there's some great business books out there that talk about those inevitable barriers that all organizations will hit. And usually it has to do with some of these foundational elements of culture and defining those things. And usually those things are measured by headcount growth in an organization, but it really has more to do with some of the fundamental cultural and structural things that need to eventually continue to evolve and transform as an organization matures and expands. And I realized that we were starting to hit one of those barriers. We've been growing quickly for a long time, but employee disengagement was starting to grow. Customer retention was starting to wane a little bit. I was like, let's do some. You guys ever do 360 anonymous reviews, whether in your current organization or anywhere else? Who? Raise hands, please. Okay, a lot haven't though. How humbling is that sometimes? The first one I did, I was like, you know what, this is fantastic, we're growing, but I want to get a little feedback from the frontline troops, basically to validate how awesome I am and how awesome this company is. That's not what happened. I printed out this thing we used, I think, 360review.com or whatever it was, and you can customize these things to kind of ensure you're getting the data and feedback that you want. And of course, there's plenty of areas for extra commentary. And you can always tell who's providing the extra commentary, even though it's anonymous. Like, I know who that guy is, he's fired. Kidding, you're not supposed to approach it that way. Printed it out, it was about 65 pages. We had it wasn't a huge company at the time, maybe 60 people, but we had a really good, this is either a good thing or a bad thing, but everybody responded. I was like, usually there's a lower percentage of respondents to these types of things, but we really encourage transparent feedback to make their lives better. We're trying to get this feedback because I want to understand how I'm doing as your leader, your manager, and how the organization can be improved. So because one of our core values was everyone has a voice. And boy, did they use it, because we have a culture of very transparent, brutally honest feedback in the SEAL teams, but it's part of our culture, so it's expected. Now, when we start to implement those things in an organization, it's got to start at the top, otherwise it won't eventually ingrain into the culture. So I sat down on a San Diego to New York flight and started reading this. I was like, okay, that's pretty good. That's not good. What does Brent do all day long? What the hell is the vision of this organization? What are we exactly trying to accomplish here? And other sort of structural things and process things. There were some good things, but there was a lot of very concerning content in this report. And again, started crying, of course. And after 4 or 5 cocktails on the plane, I got my laptop out and I was like, okay, again, trying to reflect back to my time as a leader in the SEAL community. It's not just about collecting that information and taking that gut punch, but being accountable and taking 100% ownership over the feedback you hear. And then the next step is the most important step. Telling them what I heard, what I've heard from you guys, from the team, the good, the bad. And you're not always going to get totally valuable data, but the stuff that is valuable, you need to extract that, both the good, bad, own the good as well as the bad, even more so the bad, and then tell them not only, here's what we've heard, here's what I've heard from you, but here's exactly my plan to improve in all of these areas. And then again, the follow-on of that is even more important. Those transformative steps to improve the team or the organization or the culture, or my transparency and downward communication of what the hell I do all day is the most important, so they know that you're not only accepting of that feedback, but you're actually using their data and information and their voice to improve the organization. And that continues to improve trust, it improves accountability at all levels, and it improves the engagement of the team, because then everyone having a voice is actually an authentic thing. It is part of the culture. It's not just something that we slap up on the wall or put in a PowerPoint slide or we tell the team. It's actually authentic leadership in that regard, because you're giving them a real voice. And that also helps draw out those emerging leaders in the organization, because they usually take those opportunities to really voice their opinions on here's what we really can do. And those who are disengaged either don't respond or they'll just do the bare minimum and be like, yeah, things are fine, status quo, whatever. But you could really also use those tools to identify who really cares about the culture of the organization, who wants to really positively impact the organization, its culture, its values, or even help define or redefine them. An interesting correlation there is you think that the SEAL community, we're perfect culture and whatever. We are not perfect by any means, just like any other high-performance team that's comprised of a lot of crazy A-type personality people. It's a very volatile melting pot, and we have a lot of infighting and a lot of cultural struggles that we have to overcome. That mentee that I mentioned, he's 21, already a sniper, already a JTAC. He's texting me from Iraq today, and he was like, I don't know what it is about the culture of the SEAL teams, but some guy was just giving me crap because I was working too hard. This guy, all he does, I've only mentored officers other than he's the only high school student that I mentored, and he was just so damn persistent. He kept hounding me and hounding me. I'm like, you're a sophomore in high school, I can't do anything for you right now. Eventually one day he texted me and said, I'm just checked into BUD/S. And I was like, wow, come on over. By far the most disciplined person I have ever met, much more so than the officers that I mentored into the SEAL teams. All he wants to do is go to SEAL Team 6, which is technically called Naval Special Warfare Development Group. And to do that, you have to have a very clean record. You have to perform at the peak academically and tactically to get all the best qualifications in all the best schools. So, but it's just one of those cultural things where he was like, well, why would somebody give me crap for, doing dry fire drills in my room, or for spending extra time in the gym, or for studying late at night, for my radio responsibilities? Because guys see other people, oh, well, he's working harder than me, so I'm going to try and bring him down. But our culture, again, not perfect, but it wasn't until that ethos that I mentioned, and this is very applicable to the discussion of culture and defining it and putting it on paper. The SEAL ethos didn't come about until 2005. The SEAL teams and what we are today, we were born out of the underwater demolition teams in World War II and then developed more so in Korea. But it was in Vietnam, in the latter stages of Vietnam, where we really were created as the more elite assault force that we are today. But then after 9/11, we were, again, moving at the speed of war and constant deployments and got churning and burning and bringing back lessons learned from the battlefield and in a constant state of change and transformation, till we finally said, and this started of course at the senior levels, we said we need to define who the hell we are as an organization, and that needs to start as a leadership mechanism. Then it can be part of our culture, but we don't have one. We have to define our culture and actually put it on paper and have very, very clear and concise alignment from the senior leaders in the organization as to what that culture is. Because if we don't have a defined culture and defined core values and a defined mission statement and a purpose, how are we really making decisions as leaders? How are we aligning those decisions with who we are as an organization, with the culture, with our core values? Because when you don't make decisions in an organization based on core values, if they even exist, it's not an authentic thing. And those decisions can become very misaligned. Let's say, for example, if you don't base your hiring mechanisms and reward mechanisms in an organization based on values and culture, then you're typically making pretty big mistakes. And I remember this from my companies where we were just hiring for subject matter expertise, but not for shared values, not for culture, not for that shared emotional connection to the purpose. It was a bad hire every single time. Subject matter expertise is sort of a secondary thing, especially if you have decent training programs. But if you don't have that shared purpose and those values, typically in my experience, it's not going to work out. So again, going back to defining it, we defined our SEAL ethos in 2005 at a very typical, we do 2-day off-site leadership events too. Very corporate of us, I know. But we sent everybody out to San Clemente Island. We're like, we're not leaving here. I wasn't there, but we're not leaving here until we have this defined. And except we are leaving on Sunday. But, and that's where the SEAL ethos was born. And it's basically, a 5-paragraph mission, vision, culture, purpose, values statement all wrapped up into one beautiful thing. And we make our hiring selection decisions based on that. We make all of our decisions based on that ethos as who we are as an organization. So again, it's never too late to define these things, but once you have to make decisions based on those things as far as who the organization is, who's part of it, or who will be allowed to be part of the organization. So great question, yeah. Who's next? Yes, ma'am. No, I can hear you. We're 5 feet away. I did have some hearing loss from stuff blowing up around my head, but I can hear you okay.
Well,
what?
Just kidding. We talk about, leading our teams, leading our staff. However, I think a lot of us have to collaborate with judges, elected officials,
yep.
And it's a different level of how do we collaborate and have this defining moment.
Yeah. Well, and the question is around not just internal team collaboration, but collaborating across those barriers, assuming, so collaborating with folks outside of your team or outside of people who report into that team. Is that what you're asking? More or less?
And we have to. I mean, with our judges, both court administration, you're working closely together, and we have a lot of our judges, elected officials, who all have their own defining.
Right. Well, and that's a problem in any organization, especially organizations. You can equate that to organizations, even large and small, that have silos and different teams. And of course, sometimes those siloed teams have their own subculture, their own sort of perceived values, even if the large-scale cultural and values are defined for any organization. But collaborating across those barriers is always very difficult in an organization, which goes back to the communication mechanisms you use and the clearly defined goals set for whatever that is you're trying to accomplish together with that individual or with that other team. We had problems like that in my companies too. Even at 200 employees, we had a lot of different divisions and departments, and those departments organically developed their own subcultures. But all those departments, especially for this was a digital marketing agency, so if we're going to be a truly integrated digital marketing agency, all those departments actually have to work together collaboratively to provide these integrated solutions and come up with the proper context for what they're trying to accomplish for the client. But it didn't start out that way. It was very siloed, and then when you have silos within an organization, and and collaboration becomes very difficult because they've got their goals and their metrics that they're trying to accomplish and things that they're measured on, and you've got your goals and metrics and things you're trying to accomplish, even though you have to collaborate. Sometimes it's not true collaboration, it's more of an inauthentic effort, and that's one of the ways you can measure engagement in an organization is, are we really collaborating, or are we actually kind of competing against each other? Or if it's not as dramatic as competing against each other, are we really not working together? We're just sort of going through the motions of collaboration, but not really creating that true team environment where we actually have that shared sense of purpose. Everybody's working towards a common goal, regardless of their job function, regardless of their title, regardless of their tenure or whatever it is. Everybody's helping one another. And you can see that dynamic in the SEAL teams, for example, where it's that is, when we have our own cultural issues, but when it's time to work, you see a total instant transformation. Not one person is looking out for number one. They're doing everything they can. It's in a gunfight, I'm only protecting this person and this person. I don't even think about myself. But then when you have that overlapping web of strength and protection, everybody's protected by more than one person. It creates a fighting force that's much stronger than the sum of its parts. That's why special operations work in small units and can be a very dangerous element against a much larger force. But it's kind of a dramatic example for talking about collaboration, but it really does resonate, because when you have teams that have that overlapping web of support, regardless of job function or division or department or whatever it is, and you can create that, it's got to be a cultural thing. It's got to be not just because somebody higher up says you have to do it. Everybody actually has to believe that and care about the other people. And then it goes into even the deeper level of how much do we actually care about, you know, the other people on our team, the other people in our organization, and wanting them to succeed and wanting this person to succeed and us all win together. That's a very difficult thing to really enact in most organizations in an authentic way. So I know that doesn't provide you really an answer, but I just know that I've had significant challenges with that in my own companies, and I had the benefit of being, you know, the CEO, so I could address those things from the top. But when those types of things aren't being addressed from the top, it's very hard to enact any type of sort of cultural shift or mindset shift in the middle. It can be done and eventually permeate upwards, because I believe heavily in upward management and upward leadership. But again, the people up here have to be accepting of that upward management and that upward leadership. Again, that has to be part of the culture. And when they're not, you know, there'll be other types of problems ahead. So. Other questions or comments, or again, you guys can feel free to comment on other people's commentary. Does anybody have any other experiences, challenges, successes that you guys have had related to some of the things we've talked about already? Yes, ma'am.
I was thinking about a strategy that we tried in San Bernardino in California. We all share that challenge of interacting with the judges. It's always, okay, the judges need to be involved, and never are they truly connected with the day-to-day with management operations. And so we're deploying a new case management system, and we had a really bad experience, and we want to do things differently. So we put together teams, core teams that include a mixture of judges, management, other staff, IT, you know, just a smattering of people, so that we have a philosophy of every voice has a venue to talk through what our challenges are. It's pretty new, and it's a challenge by itself. That we've got, we had a big kickoff meeting for all these core teams to get together, and we talked through our shared values, our governance, you know, what we're agreeing to do, what we refuse to do, because it's the right thing to do, and that kind of thing. So far, it's working really well, and we have to regroup every now and then to figure it out. You know, are we doing what we're supposed to? But it's really interesting how people become really comfortable interacting with this high level within your organization, the judges, and how they really fall in nicely with the group. So it's less of a challenge than we thought it was going to be, as far as that element of judges participating with the day-to-day decisions.
Yeah, no, and what you're saying, did you guys hear most of that? Yeah? What you're saying is actually a really great approach to instituting change, you know, within an organization. Whether it's, you know, we need a, you know, more collaborative software tool or whatever it is, but just in general, what you created with, you know, senior leaders, judges, and a cross-functional team is what I refer to in the book as a transformation task force. But a strong transformation task force, and this is thumbs up for you, is a cross-functional team that includes the senior people, it includes different subject matter experts, it includes people from across the organization, because it has to be authentically empowered, and therefore that's why senior leaders have to be part of that. Oftentimes where organizations get it wrong, they're like, well, we need to fix this. Well, that's just an IT function, or that's just an HR function, and they delegate a very important transformative step for the organization just to one manager perceived to own that area. No senior leaders are involved, no other cross-functional teams are created, and usually they're not even given the resources to execute it properly. And that's why so many of these types of efforts fail in organizations, is because they don't do what you did. And what you are doing is creating that transformation task force, that cross-functional team that includes people from all points on the compass. But when you do that, you have that team and it's authentically empowered, then it's just a matter of consistency and making sure you're meeting regularly and disseminating important information that you guys decide on out to the rest of the organization, so that everybody outside that task force can see progress being made. Like we talked talked about, identifying those quick wins, communicating those out. That'll keep people outside of that task force energized and saying, oh, okay, now I see what these people are doing. This is actually something we're actually investing time in, investing resources in, and these people believe it, therefore I want to believe in it too. Then you can start bringing on those naysayers, and even the early adopters can stay involved and stay engaged, even if they're not part of sort of necessarily the decision-making mechanism. So good job.
She shared about how putting together cross-functional teams and getting together and creating the mission and the values, and you shared the situation where everyone went out, we're going to create these missions and values, and that happens so much in our organizations where there's a team that's put together and that's the foundation piece, or we haven't had one, so we're going to put one together. But in your organizations, what mechanisms have you used to keep that in the forefront of individuals' minds? So when it first comes out, it's the big announcement, or you're new as an employee into the organization and you're provided the mission and values, and then we get busy with our day-to-day. So what experience do you have in keeping those mission and values when now maybe it's 2 years down the road into the forefront of your employees' minds?
Yeah, and I'll start with some of the challenges that I've had in my own organizations too. And one of the important things to note is, and you won't always achieve this, but total senior leadership alignment on what those things need to be. In my second company, again, we had raised more money and we were growing and growing and didn't want to make the same mistakes we did with the first company. So I put together a transformation task force, a culture task force, even a culture club and committee that were a cross-functional team of people who volunteered. So that's how you can organically identify these are engaged people who really want to help define this, and then sort of deploy them out to the organization to gather, important feedback from their peers who aren't part of it. But when you have misalignment up at the top, which I had in my last company, where my business partner and I were not aligned, basically because he didn't think those things were important at all. He's a sales guy, so he's a sales solves everything model. All you got to do is keep selling. Well, employee engagement's down. We'll just sell more shit to more people, this business model isn't working. Well, let's just find a whole totally new revenue stream that has nothing to do with what we're good at. Love and respect the guy, but I'm just saying, where I'm more of a, operations and culture. I believe wholeheartedly in these things because of my past experiences and just because that's how I think, and I understand their importance, and I research these things, but because there was not alignment at the top, and because there are only two founders of the company, but one was not participating at all in these transformative steps or redefining values and culture and the mission, and I had a whole team of very passionate people involved in this, but because he was not involved ever, and if he was, he would sit through the meeting like this, checking his phone and email with a disgruntled look on his face because we were wasting his time, then other people realize that someone who owns 50% control of an organization doesn't believe in this stuff. It's going to be very hard for this person over here to actually enact these things authentically across the organization, because other people will derail it. Again, going back to what we talked about before, they'll really embrace those competing priorities. I remember there's one thing, we were going through this major transformation of brand, structure, process, everything to get over one of those growth barriers. And we said one of the things we need to do is we are growing too fast. We need to really define our culture, our values, identify the customers and clients we actually are passionate about helping, and therefore will provide them better service. So we said we need to stop selling anything to anybody for 6 months. Well, he physically can't do that. So he was constantly bringing in new deals because our operations team was so overloaded that our customer satisfaction ratings were going down, because we'd have an account manager that had 500 different things to do, and therefore, regardless of their skill set, they can't execute on all those things. But when you have senior leaders continuing to put on new priorities onto their already existing full plates, the team is going to break down. Trust breaks down, fatigue sets in, and trust, especially for senior management, starts to go down, and it goes down even for me because I can't control that and I can't protect the team in the way I need to. So to your point, there does have to be good alignment at the top, as close to alignment as possible, even if it's just pretending. I'm kidding, but it has to be authentic. But the best way to do that is to integrate everything having to do with culture and values and purpose into everything you do, talking about it both through formal and informal channels as much as possible. I talk about in the book, especially as it relates to defining culture and whatever vision for transformation you have. If you think about it this way, let's say you did it and you put all this stuff into your quarterly company-wide meeting, your monthly newsletter, and a couple annual events, and you got about 20 communication points in a year. But if you as managers and leaders, if we can find formal and informal channels to casually talk about the vision and the purpose, and hey, I call it purposeful storytelling in the book. Part of the culture-driven transformation model is find a casual opportunity to talk to a team member about, hey, here's a great thing that Susan did, and here's how it really aligns with this renewed vision and the values and how she, whatever she accomplished, that tells this sort of casual story, and it starts to permeate across the organization. And if you have as many people, your change evangelists, your leaders, your managers, using 2 or 3 at most times a day to casually mention something, even if it's off the cuff, that relates, and it's aligned, of course, then you have thousands of communication touch points in a year that have to do with supporting the vision and the values and the purpose of the organization. The other thing to do is also, if you have, let's say, to your point, this project you're trying to do is, identify or even manufacture what we call quick wins. So what is something you guys as a team, as a task force, can identify at the 3-month mark that you can accomplish and then communicate it out to the organization and tell the story of that success. Therefore, you're emotionally engaging people in that mission narrative of even the people who are like, I don't know why the hell they're trying to do it. That didn't work at my last organization, or this software doesn't work, I know because I used it before, or whatever. Or senior leadership changes their mind all the time, so this will never go to fruition. Those people start to come on board if you can consistently communicate those quick wins, 3-month, 6-month, 12-month, 18-month marks, and then continually to ingrain those things in the culture. That's when it becomes authentic, and that's when people really start buying in to that vision. So. What else? Any other thoughts or questions? I see a lot of head nodding, so I know there's people thinking about this stuff in here. Or just working out your neck, I don't know. What else? Anything about leadership challenges or thoughts on the definitions of leadership and management? Yes, go ahead.
Recognition.
Yes, recognition.
People in video land, so.
What's that? Oh, okay.
So can you talk a little bit about recognition?
Yes. The question, you already heard it, but it's about recognition, and I'm assuming the mechanisms of it and the importance of recognition. Wildly important, as we all kind of know, we just don't always do it properly or in the right context or with enough consistency or with consistency across the team. And again, I've made these mistakes myself, but recognizing the team, that's another great mechanism to what we were just talking about, recognizing individuals or teams that are doing things, their behaviors, their mindsets, and their activities align with the vision or the culture or the values or the new initiatives that the organization is trying to roll out, even if they're closely, intimately connected to that initiative or even if they're not. And so you can use that, and not just through your one-on-one, feedback sessions or in a newsletter where you got 2 people's pictures and like, oh, they're, the employee of the month. Nobody cares about that crap anymore. It's got to be really a lot more exciting, and again, through formal and informal channels. And when you can publicly recognize people for the behaviors and mindsets and activities that align with what you're trying to accomplish, then those people who are not necessarily participating as much, they're more of the disengaged folks, most of them, and if they don't, you don't want them on your team, but most of them will start to say, you know what, I kind of want some public recognition, or I see that senior leaders or managers really do care about these behaviors and activities. They weren't just talking about it. It's not an inauthentic thing. I want to be publicly recognized, or I want the public recognition and maybe the financial compensation that comes with it, or what other, other types of benefits or reward mechanisms that can be in place that people know are there, but if we don't use them, or we use them inconsistently, or we're always rewarding the same people, that happens too sometimes. There's always the same people who are getting publicly rewarded. Then we have to think about, okay, well, we need to kind of expand these reward mechanisms or use those opportunities to coach others and get them up to the level where they're performing, at the same level. But you guys are nodding, so I'm assuming you've seen this before. I've seen it. We used to do these things in my own company, not on purpose, not by design, but you're oftentimes, as a manager, you're focusing in 2 areas. You're keeping your eye on your star players because they're doing great, but oftentimes then you give them too much work because every project's got to go to the person who's going to execute. Then they stop what? They stop executing. Yeah, and they break. Or then Your other points of attention are your squeaky wheels. As managers, we're typically focusing predominantly on those people who are the actively disengaged, the people who are complaining, those people who may be well respected because they're subject matter experts, but they're more of a toxic person in the organization. Typically, that will dominate the majority of our time, and then we start sort of ignoring all the people in the middle that are still doing great work and that are engaged, but we're not doing anything to publicly recognize them, formally recognize them, informally recognize them just through, managing by walking around and saying, hey, Fred, I loved what you did with this project, and Fred might be like, I can't believe you know my name. But it's those formal and informal channels that have to be there, and also making sure it's consistent across the board. All those reward mechanisms have to be applicable to everybody. It cannot ever be perceived that there's favoritism or anything else like that as part of the culture, because that can obviously, well, sometimes maybe it is in organizations a part of the culture, and that's very damaging, and your employee turnover will skyrocket. So those reward mechanisms are very important, but I've always try to be very creative in how you deploy those things, as long as they're consistent and as long as you're trying to find and identify as many people as possible to be rewarded for certain things. Because it don't always have to be some big magnanimous achievement. It can be smaller iterative things that people do, and maybe it was just something that somebody's exhibiting our core values. To your point earlier, that's a great way to casually tell the story about the core values, because I just saw John over here. He was finished with his work for the day, and he went around and asked 3 different people, hey, can I help you with anything? Even though they were from a different division or a different department. That's expected in the SEAL teams, it's expected in any high performance team. If I'm done with my job, I'm not going anywhere until I ask every single person, can I help you with anything else? And even if, typically they'll say no, but it shows that that level of teamwork and that level of care for your colleagues. So, thank you. And I believe there was another one here. Let me just repeat it, or you come? Okay.
I need steps.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about the SEALs and the concept of having horizontal collaboration among the team members, but is there any vertical collaboration with the people that are giving you your orders?
100%. Usually the question, of course, is, horizontal collaboration seems sort of self-evident in the SEAL teams, but we have a large amount of vertical collaboration, and mainly because our post 9/11 reality has forced us to transform, to do away with some of those vertical silos that impede that level of collaboration, and not just within our Naval Special Warfare organization, but also outside of the organization. There's a great book called Top Secret America, and there's a foldout of the post 9/11 intelligence communities. Literally dozens and dozens and dozens of agencies and webs of agencies and agencies that report to other agencies, and those have 12 agencies that spin off. I can see just billions of dollars being wasted, to be honest with you. Because sometimes, like we've done there, and in organizations, we try to create more collaborative environments, but we overcomplicate it. And then we create too many networks, and it's too complicated, and there's overlapping resources and time and money being wasted. So it becomes overkill, so to speak, and we run to our death. But the vertical collaboration is imperative for us because, like I said before, to move at the speed these wars required, we have a very decentralized enemy. We were this, and we thought we were fighting this, a traditional organizational structure, which of course, as you guys kind of know just by watching the news, ISIS and our nation's enemies are very decentralized. You could call it disorganized, but they're decentralized. And that is very hard to defend against. It's very hard to fight. It's very hard to plan and train against that because they're always changing. They're always popping up in a new area. So we had to become, more of less hierarchy and more networks and pods of highly empowered people that don't need that have autonomy and decision making, that do not need to go all the way to the top to execute on the battlefield, because that gets people killed. When you cannot execute on the battlefield or get that high value target that's 2 minutes away from you, but you're waiting on the phone for someone up at the very top to give you the green light, and they don't give you the green light, and you'll never find out why. We've done and that still happens, of course, but we've done a pretty good job of decentralizing those controls ourselves so that we have vertical collaboration and vertical autonomy. So real leadership, decision-making capabilities are really pushed all the way down. I mean, on the battlefield, you might have a fire team of guys ranging from the age of 21 to 30, but that team will execute on the battlefield making their own decisions. I'm not calling my platoon commander to ask him if I can go left or go right or shoot down this way. We're all making those decisions, or we need to take this house and move our sniper position to another location because the enemy shifted on the battlefield. We're making those decisions, but then we quickly relay that information, that data to everybody else, so everybody has that heightened level of situational awareness. And that situational awareness comes from that vertical level of collaboration and decentralized controls. Maybe one more. Are we good? Yeah? Patty, are we done? Is Patty even in here? No, okay. Yes?
So you mentioned one of the philosophies is like all in all the time. How do you motivate people that are not all in all the time?
which, as we've identified, is most of them. It's the 67% who are not all in all the time. They're just around. They come in sometimes. It's making me think of the millennials again. Who asked for a raise 3 months into the job, right out of school? Millennials do. And you know what they'll do? As a negotiating point, they'll bring you a job offer from a competitor. I say, there's the door, my friend. There's your promotion somewhere else. Have fun. But who wants to work from home 5 days a week? Millennials do. And when they're there, they don't want to wear shoes. I took away flip-flops because our organization, Southern California, I said no more flip-flops because we have more high-profile clients come to the office. I know I blacked out. I'm off on a tangent right now, but it was like a coup. There was petitions going around. There was a leader of this transformation task force, and literally petitions going around. And there, we had a gym in the office, and during lunchtime, there was only 2 people that worked down in there, me and that guy. So every day I walk in, I'm like, oh, son of a bitch. He'd sit up on the bench press and be like, so, bro, what's up with this whole flip-flop thing, man? Like every day, the same conversation. And then, but then millennials are also highly intelligent and resourceful. So they'll have all these crazy ideas and push back and leading up the chain of command and having a voice. I took that away as a core value, by the way. Nobody has a voice except for me now. The millennials killed it. And he's like, technically speaking, I could be in flip-flops. I'll get to answering the question in a second. I'm also forgot the question by now, but I could be in flip-flops, nice jeans, and a polo shirt, and technically be out of dress code. And I'm like, damn it. He's right. He's like, but Joe over there could be in combat boots, baggy pants, and a t-shirt, and technically be in dress code. I'm like, oh my God. So we hired a new, not a human resources director, we called her the director of people and culture, and she's like, give him the frickin' flip-flops back. Just like in marriage, choose your battles, people. So, what the hell was the question? I have post-traumatic stress from managing millennials.
When people aren't all in, how do we get them in?
Right, it's a great question too. We give them the frickin' flip-flops back is what we do. We give them back the flip-flops. Again, it goes back to all the things we've really been talking about in creating a culture where people can actually be engaged. Some of the key reasons that organizations suffer from disengagement is because there's 2 things, or 2 categories. There's structural barriers that impede engagement and collaboration, and there's behavioral barriers that impede engagement and collaboration. And when you have those in place and nobody's really actively trying to break down those barriers, dissolve them, create opportunities, not just for, okay, you guys have to collaborate on this project and you're going to start at 5 p.m. every day, and collaboration has got to be a part of the everyday work environment. It's got to be, there were some things I did in my own organization during our transformation. We were trying to be more collaborative, more innovative so that we can provide better integrated marketing solutions for our customers. But if you walked around the office, this is just a good example, if you walked around the office, it was just high-walled cubicles, and nothing that screamed innovation, nothing that screamed collaboration, not very many rooms, private rooms and large conference rooms where teams could meet. So we basically, and this was a 17,000 square foot, 2-story office space, one of the things we did was, like a lot of these business transformation shows like The Profit or Undercover Boss, you'll see visual transformation happening that aligns with what they're trying to accomplish. So we redesigned the entire office. We took down all those old cubicles, all those walls that are sort of those that scream barriers. We'd have people who would be sitting in cubicles next to each other and would Google chat instead of just talk. you know? and so we took all those out. We created networks of workstations. We knocked down walls literally and figuratively and created more. Collaboration is also good when you can have smaller private rooms or small teams and can huddle and do quick, project management type scrums. And a lot of those, we made all those rooms glass so you could see people collaborating. So again, there's things that you can do to the point of getting more people engaged to be all in. When you can have people visibly seeing those things and other people doing them, and those people who aren't totally engaged or all in want to be a part of that. If they don't, send them somewhere else and find someone who does. And that's just the reality of management. But when you can have some actual mechanisms in place where people can see this, they can feel it. You can feel it as a sense when you walk into the workspace or the office or whatever it is, then you're more likely to be able to start to transform mindsets and behaviors that align with being all in all the time. So, and that was a phrase coined by one of our fallen SEAL Team 6 team leaders, and he used that phrase, and it became sort of a cultural thing in the SEAL teams, because when he would indoctrinate new guys into SEAL Team 6, so we have the regular SEAL teams, and then we have Tier 1 special operations assets like SEAL Team 6, the Army has Delta Force, but to get there, you have to be in the SEAL teams for 4 years, you have to be recommended by your boss, you have to be a very highly, like I was saying, my mentee, highly disciplined, highly accountable. Then you go through another rigorous 9-month training program and selection process that 50% of SEALs do not make it through. But once you're there, he would sit them down and be like, ask them about what they felt their level of participation should be on the team. Knowing, of course, there was only one correct answer, and that was to be all in all the time, which is probably why their divorce rate's so high. But unfortunately, you're married to two people. But it's really sort of encompasses everything we've been talking about as far as structural and behavioral things that can be transformed to get people more engaged. And again, you're always going to have those disengaged, and those disengaged that if you work towards coaching them to become engaged and they can't, get rid of them. And those that can, well, it's just, get them somewhere else. And those that do, then you have a larger pool of people who are all in all the time. So thank you guys. I think that's about it. Yes?
Not 9 more minutes.
Oh, we do? Watch this fast. Okay,
one of the things you shared was, talking about office space, and I think a lot of people in the room here is probably thinking, oh shoot, in order to reconfigure our office would take a 2-year strategic plan and a budget proposal. So one of the things that I recently did in my department, and it kind of happened by chance. So we, in training, we have a lot of large-scale projects. Some of our training programs span, 6 months and so forth. And so there's a lot of components that go within each of these projects. And so we implemented a project plan, which lists all the components of the plan and also uses the RACI designation of responsible, accountable, consultant, and informational, and so forth. A side product of that was the fact that there's some components that are like, send out the email announcement about the graduation ceremony, which sounds so minor. But when you see it in this overall project plan, then it helps those individuals see that them sending an email, them following up with some surveys and those types of things are part of the overall plan. And if it wasn't for those administrative functions, we couldn't have an overall project. So that was a side component. I liked it because I'm very OCD and type A, so I was able to track everything, but then the side component was really seeing those individuals and where they fall within that overall project that's very long term. So that just requires printing and paper and some time to put together the project plan. So that's just one of the tangible things I just wanted to pass along.
Well, it's a good point too, because oftentimes it's not just about mindsets and culture, but the actual tools that we use for collaboration in an organization, whether they be software or applications or things like that. And making sure that everybody's trained on those tools and using those tools. So it's not just just one-on-one collaboration and team collaboration and dynamic groups and task forces, but having the actual tools and the training on those tools is imperative to actually improve efficiencies and improve communication, because everybody can be aligned by what's going on, because everybody, or the majority of people who need to, have access to that information. And that's where sometimes we fall short, as we talk about these things, but we don't have the proper tools, or we don't have the proper training on those tools. One of the mistakes I made in my last company was that, again, part of that vision was to be more collaborative, but we had like 5 different software tools that didn't communicate with one another, all trying to achieve basically one goal. And so one of those transformative steps was to eliminate all those and find one project management and collaboration software tool that could do all those functions. First mistake was I spent way too much money on a big salary for someone to come in who had done this before, and in a totally different organization. And he brought in, and we gave him the autonomy to choose the product, which was basically a Ferrari when we needed a Toyota, because we had never had anything like this before. So it was too complex, way too expensive, and we could only really utilize usefully, I don't know, maybe 10% of it. The rest was just stuff that we really didn't need, and so we scrapped that. And then, of course, people start to not believe in this new initiative because they're like, oh, well, leadership totally screwed this up. They chose the wrong tool, and now we're 6 months behind schedule. And so we tried to, use some storytelling and communicate why we're making these new shifts, but it was clearly that we were just making mistakes. And so we chose a more simplified collaboration tool, but then we also, in the short term, until we pulled our heads out of our, we didn't provide the proper training or the time to do the proper training. And if people don't know how to use the tool, they're just going to stop using it. And especially when it's a tool for collaboration. We're trying to not just collaborate in person, but have actual resources and tools to collaborate. But if we don't teach people how to use these tools, then they're eventually going to stop using them or use them just marginally in the way that they think is easiest for them. I see a lot of head nodding going on over here. And then you either have to turn that around and or start from scratch again. And of course, that continues to damage trust and the perception of leadership's ability to actually execute these things properly. So we have to make sure that those task forces of those decision-making tools and mechanisms are all aligned. There's senior leadership alignment, and we don't just delegate that type of stuff to one perceived person or department or division, but as many people as possible are involved, so everybody can sort of celebrate those wins together. Everybody can actually collaborate on what needs to happen and how it's going to actually improve the organization. And then, of course, when those obstacles come up, everybody's aware of them, and everybody can kind of take ownership over mistakes made or obstacles to navigate as a team, not just, well, that group over there totally screwed this project up, so I'm just going to kind of sit over here and not believe in anything they're doing. So that's a great example. But. Yes, sir.
So, kind of a follow-on to that question, can you just briefly talk about extreme ownership, that concept, in organizational structures and maybe versus accountability?
One of the extreme ownership is a function of, I use that term because 2 of my buddies, Leif Babin and Jocko Willing, wrote a book called Extreme Ownership, and it's not very prescriptive from a business nature, but it talks about our concept of having a culture of accountability and the SEAL teams, how that can relate. And there's a lot of good business books about accountability and making that part of an organizational culture and the financial impact that has on an organization, the impact it has on engagement and trust, because accountability oftentimes has sort of this negative concept, this negative connotation of, well, this is just a series of punishments that we'll dole out when people screw up. Well, it's actually, when approached properly, the totally opposite thing. When you have, can you build accountability into the culture? One of my favorite books is actually teaches you how to do this and provides a lot of tools and mechanisms to build an accountable culture. It has tons of case studies, and I have some in my book as well. And I talk about this book in my book, but it's called Change the Culture, Change the Game, and it's about tools for creating a culture of accountability. I realized that is actually a trademark term when I got a certified letter from their attorney. I was like, how the hell am I supposed to know that culture of accountability is a trademark term? But anyways, it is. And they start with something called the results pyramid. And there's 4 layers to that pyramid. And first is, when we think about culture and vision and the strategy of an organization, is at the very top we have the results. Maybe the results we're getting, but more so what they call the R1 results, the results we're getting, and the R2 results are the results we want to be getting or should be getting. And what type of culture do we need and what type of mindset transformation do we need to achieve the desired results, not what we're getting today. The second layer is the actions that need to be taken proactively by not just the leaders, but everybody in the organization to achieve those desired results. The third layer is the behaviors and mindsets that people need to embody to proactively take those actions, to be engaged and drive those results. And the bottom is, what are the cultural experiences that we have in an organization that will instill those beliefs and mindsets? And so a cultural experience can be pretty much anything from where people sit, to the types of meetings you have, to the off-site events you attend, to how you share information, to how you deal with people internally and externally from the organization, how leaders and managers treat people, the reward mechanisms we use. All those are cultural experiences that, for better or worse, define the culture of an organization. But unfortunately, most organizations' cultures aren't by design. They're more haphazard, just from years of experiences and rituals and beliefs of those on the team. And that's where culture transformation and its importance comes into play. But accountability really has to start, just like most things, it has to start at the very top. If you don't have very disciplined, accountable leaders who take extreme ownership, not just of successes, of course, but over their failures and flaws. I've seen some of the most amazing SEAL commanders like Jocko, amazing business leaders, take radical ownership over massive failures for their organization when there's plenty of blame to go around. But at the end of the day, you know, that is one of the burdens of command. Is you know, as they say, shit rolls uphill. It all eventually comes to the very top of an organization, and you cannot build a culture of accountability without the very senior people in the organization embodying that themselves, and then eventually it permeates the organization, and eventually over time those cultural transformations start to ingrain themselves in the foundation. So, anyways, thank you guys. This has been awesome to spend time with you. God bless. Appreciate it. All right. What's that? Oh, thank you so much.